Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we slip into the shadows of candlelight, where jasmine perfumes the air and the sound of water follows you like a second heartbeat. You're walking slowly, because that's all your body wants to do, toward a walled compound under the moonlit sky. This isn't a castle, not a palace, not a temple. It's a hospital, but not the kind with sterile lights and beeping machines. This one hums with a strange music you can't quite place. Strings, flutes, voices, all wafting out into the evening like incense. It's the 12th century. You're in Damascus, or maybe it's Cairo, or Cordova. The records blur, but the feeling doesn't. You're standing at the threshold of a Bamaristan, a word from Persian roots meaning house of the sick, but also, sometimes, a house of the soul. You can't quite tell which you are tonight. The guards open the gates, you step in, and suddenly it's as if the world has dipped below water. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere interesting, post your location and local time. I'd love to know where in the world this finds you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You cross the threshold, and the cool stone presses against the soles of your feet. It's all marble here. Walls, floors, pillars, veined and polished, reflecting the soft light of oil lamps hanging like tiny suns. The corridors are open to a central courtyard, where the night air drifts in lazily. You can hear the gurgling of a fountain just out of view, the liquid laughter of water spilling from one basin to the next. No screaming patients, no frantic nurses, just calm, which should make you suspicious, but you're too tired to be suspicious. Or maybe you're just enchanted, because as you walk farther in, something shifts. A low note, drawn from an instrument you can't see, vibrates in your ribs. Not loud, just there, like a second pulse. The scent of saffron drifts past you, then sandalwood, then something herbal and unfamiliar, dried mint steeped in vinegar. You don't know. You don't need to know. That's part of the science here. Overwhelm the senses just enough that the mind slows down. You've entered the sleep ritual without realizing it. A man walks past you in a flowing robe. Not a doctor, not a priest, something in between. He nods politely. His eyes are kind. You follow the sound of music toward the heart of the Bamaristan, past rows of shaded lanterns that flicker like they're trying not to wake the wall, and then you're in the courtyard. Full moon above. A rectangular pool reflects the light, surrounded by orange trees heavy with blossom. Birds sleep in their cages along the colonnade, while two men in opposite corners play dueling ouds. One plucks slow, rising notes. The other plays something mournful and sweet, like a song meant for someone who isn't coming home. You sit, not because someone tells you to, but because that's what the bench beneath the fig tree seems to want you to do. First time, says a voice. You blink. A young nurse stands beside you, holding a clay pitcher and a linen cup. You nod. She pours. The drink is cool, faintly bitter. Barley water, she says. Good for the liver. Better with music. And there it is again. That idea that healing isn't just a matter of cutting and stitching. That maybe you don't just treat the body here. Maybe you soothe it. Like a child. Like a frightened animal. Like a sleepless mind. Historians still argue whether music was considered a central part of care or just a fancy distraction for the elite. But you're not thinking about that now. You're watching an elderly patient across the courtyard close his eyes as a boy begins to play a ney flute. The old man's breathing slows in time with the rhythm. You feel it too. The flute moves like wind through leaves. The strings follow like water over stone. And then, a voice, low, resonant, reciting a verse of poetry so old it creaks like an ancient door. The soul, when weary, does not seek medicine, but scent and sound and shade within. Nobody claps, that would be rude. Instead, the courtyard just breathes it in. The music becomes air, the poetry becomes dusk. You sip your barley water and wonder if your heart's been hurting all these years because nobody ever thought to sing to it. A few courtyards over, someone is playing a tambourine with a rhythm so steady it sounds like footsteps in snow. Somewhere else, a deep drum mimics the slow, strong beat of a heart at rest. This place is filled with instruments, and not a single one of them is trying to show off. Fun fact: in some Bamar stands, certain musical modes were reserved for different times of day. Morning tunes to wake, evening songs to calm. It's like Spotify if Spotify had to be approved by both an imam and an astronomer. You shift your weight, the bench creaks quietly. Above you, a cat pads silently across a carved wooden lattice. Somewhere far off, a bell chimes. The nurse returns with a thin blanket and a smile. "You'll sleep here tonight," she says. "By the garden, you'll feel better." You believe her. Because what if this is what medicine used to mean? Not just mending bones or purging toxins, but gathering yourself again? Tomorrow, you'll meet a physician, one with ink-stained fingers and an oud strapped to his back. But for now, just breathe. The music is still playing, the air is still warm, and you're not alone. Section 2. You wake not with a jolt, but with a soft exhale. The kind of awakening that happens when your body has nothing left to fight. The first thing you register is water. Again, always water. Not loud, not insistent. Just murmuring through the courtyard pool like it's having a private conversation with gravity. You sit up slowly, the linen blanket sliding off your shoulders. Your body still aches in familiar ways. Life hasn't rewired itself overnight, but your mind feels unusually quiet, like someone turned down the volume on everything. And then there's the light. Sunrise, slipping in through carved arches, laying warm ribbons of gold across the stone. It pools on the tiles, spills into the water, catches on the soft curls of steam rising from clay cups set along the colonnade. Breakfast, apparently, comes with scenery. A young boy, not more than 12, carries a basket of dates and warm flatbread past you. He grins without slowing down and vanishes around a column. No "how are you feeling," no checklist of symptoms, just bread, dates, and that music again. This time, it's quieter, simpler. One flute, one oud, and the occasional gentle clack of a wooden clapper in the far corridor. You start to notice that the music isn't random. It follows the rhythm of the hospital itself. Like birds, matching the wind. Each sound seems to nudge you toward calm. You stand, finally, and wander down a long hallway shaded with arched screens and carved lattice. The walls are thick, designed to trap coolness, and every 20 paces or so, there's a stone basin of water for washing your hands, your face, your thoughts. Above one basin, someone has hung a small copper bell. You ring it. It makes a sound like someone sighing through a smile. This hallway, like so many in Islamic hospitals, leads from garden to garden, room to room, always returning to the center, the courtyard. It's no accident. These buildings were engineered for peace. Some say Avicenna himself helped design early versions, a physician, philosopher, architect hybrid, who probably didn't sleep much. Each element, you realize, is intentional. The color of the tiles, deep turquoise and white, soothes the eyes. The shapes in the mosaics, never human, never animal, create harmony through geometry, repeating patterns like mantras for the mind. Historians still argue whether these architectural choices were based purely on Islamic aesthetics, or whether ancient Persian and Greek healing philosophies also played a role. But you, standing barefoot on a cool stone floor, only care that it feels like walking inside a lullaby. You turn a corner and arrive at a domed chamber. This must be one of the sleeping wards, but it doesn't look like a hospital room. It looks like someone tried to cross a cathedral with a musician's living room. Beds line the perimeter, low to the ground, with small tables beside each one. Above, the dome catches every sound, carries it upward, and softens it before letting it drift back down like feathered snow. And in the center of the room, a fountain. Of course, always the fountain. This one is shaped like an 8-petaled flower, each spout sending water into the bowl at a different rhythm. Someone really thought about this. You glance up. The ceiling is painted with stars. You half expect a nurse to shush you, to demand credentials, or hand you a clipboard. Instead, a man in a robe gestures for you to sit. He doesn't speak, just waves a hand toward a cushion near the fountain. You sit. He sits across from you, legs folded neatly, and plays a short tune on a small harp-like instrument. A test? Perhaps. When he finishes, he finally speaks. Did you feel that in your chest? Or your head? You blink. Both? He nods, pleased. Your spleen is stubborn, but teachable. He doesn't ask your name, he asks your temperament. You doesn't ask your name, he asks your temper, your humors, whether you tend toward heat or cold, dryness or moisture, whether grief sits in your joints or anger in your belly. This is how he begins his diagnosis, not with blood, but with tone. In medieval Islamic medicine, the 4 humors still ruled: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. But here they're tuned, balanced not just with herbs and syrups, but with vibrations. Music, he says, is the physician of that which does not bleed. A fun, but possibly apocryphal detail. Some hospitals employed musicians not as entertainers, but diagnosticians. A patient's reaction to a certain makam, an Arabic musical scale, could reveal their internal imbalances. If you cried during a particular melody, they knew where to look. The doctor claps his hands twice. A young girl enters, carrying a clay jar of rosewater and a folded cloth. She gently wipes your temples, then places your hands in a bowl of warm infusion. Chamomile, maybe, or crushed date pits steeped in honey. No one has yet mentioned illness, or pills, or bills. Instead, they seem to be tuning you like an instrument, finding the places where your frequencies have warped, where your chords have gone slack, where dissonance has crept into your core. The doctor taps a small drum, 3 beats, then a pause, 3 beats again. He watches your breathing, times it with the rhythm, smiles. Better. You leave the room lighter than you entered, not healed, not whole, but seen in a way that feels older than science, like your discomfort was a song and someone finally sang back. You return to the courtyard. The sun is higher now. Birds are chirping. You pass a nurse who hums to herself as she arranges bundles of mint and thyme. Music is the air here, and as you pass the pool again, the breeze picks up. You catch a single note, played somewhere in the hospital, that makes you stop in your tracks. You don't know why, but suddenly you remember a childhood lullaby, one your grandmother sang when you were sick. The melody isn't the same, but the feeling is. And maybe that's the point. Section 3. Later that morning, you find yourself being led, gently, wordlessly, through a series of mosaic-tiled hallways to a smaller courtyard shaded by flowering vines. Here, under a pergola woven with grape leaves, sits a man tuning an oud. He looks up as you approach, his fingers still plucking at the strings, not to perform, but to listen. "You're the one who cried at the harp scale," he says without smiling. "Good, that means we can begin." He pats the cushion beside him. The oud in his lap is older than you, older than your country, possibly older than the courtyard itself. Its surface is smooth with use. Its rosette, carved in exquisite floral filigree, seems to breathe when he strums. You sit. This, you learn quickly, is no ordinary physician. He's what they once called a musiki tabib, a music doctor. In another life, he might have been a court performer. Here, he is something more peculiar, a healer who listens with his ears and treats with a plectrum. He plucks a single string. This is Hijaz, he says, good for warming the cold-hearted. You give a half smile, but he doesn't. He strikes a chord, minor, layered, mournful, then looks directly at you. Still feel it in your chest? Yes. He nods and plays it again. Slower, grief, he says, as though announcing the weather. And just like that, your medical diagnosis has begun, with sound. In medieval Islamic medicine, especially in institutions like the great Bimaristans of Cairo and Baghdad, music wasn't a side activity. It wasn't ambiance. It was therapy. Prescribed, dosed, observed. Some records suggest physicians carried instruments alongside their surgical tools, especially ouds and nays. One famous Damascus doctor allegedly refused to treat anyone who couldn't sit still through a full song. You wonder how that would fly in your modern ER. The oud doctor plays another phrase, lighter this time, teasing and lilting. Rast, he says, for vitality, for strengthening the spirit, for the liver, maybe. He leans closer. You ever been sung back into yourself? You haven't, but you don't say that out loud. Instead, you watch him shift the tuning, creating something unfamiliar. He doesn't tell you what this one's for, just plays. You sit quietly, feeling the notes spiral around you like lazy birds. One lands gently in your memory, an old wound you hadn't thought about in years. Not dramatic, just there, like a sore tooth you'd learned to chew around. The doctor watches your face, reading your response like a pulse. He mutters. There it is. And then, suddenly, he stops. Your job now, he says, is to do nothing. You blink. He gestures toward a nearby alcove, a shaded bench padded with cushions. Rest there. The music will find you. Don't chase it. You nod, confused but obedient. When a man with that kind of calm tells you to rest, you rest. You lie back. The vines overhead sway. Birds sing. Someone, somewhere in the ward, begins to drum. A rhythm, like footsteps in deep sand. And then it starts again. The oud. A new melody. You don't know how, but you're certain it's for you. Like someone's writing your biography in notes instead of words. It's subtle, almost teasing, as if the music is trying to coax something out of hiding. You feel your body loosening, your thoughts untangling. Fun fact, in certain hospitals, patients were matched to musicians like therapy animals. The belief was that not every musician could heal every patient. Some played better for the grieving, others soothed the angry. One musician in Cordoba was known only for treating insomnia. With a song so monotonous, it was reportedly banned from dinner parties. Historians still argue whether these musical assignments were based on rigorous observation or just institutional tradition passed down like superstition. But sitting here, you believe it, not because it's logical, but because your body wants it to be true. The oud continues. The doctor hums softly along. You close your eyes. It's not hypnosis, not meditation, more like a recalibration. You've spent years tuning yourself to deadlines, alerts, guilt, and noise. But here, someone else has retuned you, and for the first time in a long time, your internal metronome slows down. You drift. You wake again, not knowing you'd even slept. The sun has shifted. A tray of fruit and herbs sits beside you, untouched. The music has stopped. The doctor appears, carrying a leather-bound notebook. He sits beside you, opens it, and jots something in the margins. Spleen improving, he mutters. Pulse steadier. Next, melancholia. We'll use Bayati scale, with ney accompaniment. He snaps the book shut and looks at you with genuine warmth. Bayati? You don't need to understand it, he says. You just need to let it happen. That afternoon, he teaches you to listen with your fingers. You press them to the body of the oud as he plays, feeling the vibrations. He doesn't ask you to play, just to feel. The liver likes vibration, he says. The heart likes melody. The mind likes poetry. But the soul just wants to be heard. Somewhere nearby, a woman is singing in a language you don't understand. Her voice floats across the courtyard like steam from a bowl of mint tea. It makes your eyes sting for reasons you can't explain. Tomorrow, the doctor says, standing, we try singing. You laugh nervously. He doesn't. Instead, he nods toward the fountain. Because if you never use your voice, your sorrow has nowhere to go. And just like that, he's gone. His oud slung over his shoulder, like a whisper, waiting to be heard. Section 4. The next morning begins with soft clapping. Not applause. No, that would be far too modern and energetic for this place, but an intricate rhythmic pulse played with 2 flat wooden spoons, tapped delicately in the courtyard as the sun stretches across the tiles. You blink awake, still on your cushion from the day before, limbs limp with a rest deeper than sleep. The clapping stops. A ney flute answers, its breathy note curling around the fountain's murmur. You sit up slowly, not quite wanting to break the spell. A nurse appears. He's waiting for you, she says, offering a warm towel soaked in rosewater. You press it to your face and inhale. The music, the scent, the light, they all arrive together like parts of a well-rehearsed play. When you reach the pergola again, the oud doctor is already seated, barefoot, legs folded, instrument nestled in his lap. Today, he's not alone. Beside him sits a second musician, older, with a frame drum called a daff, and a twinkle in his eye that says he doesn't take anything, including your presence, too seriously. The oud doctor gestures. We're going to play. You're going to breathe. You nod, though it feels silly. But when the music begins, slow, hypnotic, layered, you can't help but follow. The daff pulses like a heartbeat, and you can't help but follow. The daff pulses like a heartbeat. The oud wanders above it, sometimes tender, sometimes teasing. The rhythm is subtle but precise, like walking through a fog with familiar landmarks just barely visible. Now hum, the doctor says softly. You hesitate. I can't sing. He shrugs. You're not singing, you're humming. There's a difference. He demonstrates. Just one note, held gently. It vibrates in his throat. Not loud, but true. You try. Your voice wavers, catches, but then finds something steady inside your chest. The 2 musicians adjust, changing keys, shifting tone, and you feel your note slip right into their pattern. You're not leading. You're not even following. You're just part of it. Historians still argue whether these bedside musical sessions were seen as rituals or treatments, whether the hospitals documented outcomes or simply trusted the process. But sitting here, you're pretty sure the only outcome that matters is the softening behind your ribs. The doctor plays a variation on the melody. That's the Mokum for the lungs, he says. Useful when grief makes it hard to breathe. You nod. Because suddenly, you're remembering a time when it was hard to breathe. Not from illness, but from sadness you didn't know how to name. The memory flickers, uninvited yet welcome, and then passes, like mist in morning sun. They keep playing, and you keep humming. You don't realize how long it's gone on until the daff player smiles and says, "We've finished lunch, and nearly dinner, too." You blink. Hours, gone like smoke. Your body feels warm. Not hot, not sore, just present. You lean back against the pillar behind you and exhale deeply, like your lungs are rediscovering what space feels like. The oud doctor packs away his instrument. Tomorrow, he says, we play something more serious. You'll be lying down for that. Why, you ask? Because we'll be treating your liver, he says, deadpan, and you don't want to be vertical for that. A joke? Maybe. Hard to tell. His humor is wrapped in layers of silk and solemnity. That evening, you're allowed to walk through the wards. Not to speak, just to observe. Each room has its own soundscape. One patient reclines beneath a domed ceiling as a pair of girls play flutes in alternating tones, call and response, like birds at dawn. Another lies in near-deckness, listening to a deep, resonant drumbeat that seems to echo his pulse. Nurses move silently between them, adjusting instruments the way modern nurses might adjust IV drips. It's not about performance. It's about the absence of doubt about death. It's about an alternating track. It's about how perfect and timid and desperate and deeply felt everything is here. And it's about freedom and the freedom to pursue whatever it is they want. It's about a freedom none of us have ever had before. No one claps, no one bows. It's about calibration. You pass a small chamber with a lute hanging on the wall and a wooden cradle in the center. Inside, a baby sleeps. A nurse rocks the cradle with one foot while playing a single-note melody on a reed pipe. You're told this is the ward for infants born to patients, children whose mothers were too sick to care for them, and so the music cares for them instead. Fun fact, some historical records suggest that lullabies were considered a formal medical intervention in certain Islamic hospitals. There were even prescribed songs for infants with fevers, colic, or night terrors. One treatise described the ideal lullaby tempo as being like waves gently lapping a boat that will not capsize. You continue walking, softer now. You feel like you're moving through a forest of sound. Each room a different tree, each hallway a different trail. Eventually, you return to your own courtyard, where a single oud player sits by the pool, playing not for anyone, but for the water. The melody ripples across the surface, the moon is high, and something inside you, once tight as a fist, has begun to uncurl. You sit again beneath the fig tree, a breeze stirs the lanterns, and you realize that for the first time in weeks, maybe months, your jaw isn't clenched. The oud doctor passes by, nods, and says, "See, you're learning to listen." You smile, and he keeps walking. Section 5. The next morning is different. You feel it before you open your eyes. The music has changed. Not the notes. They're still gentle, still circling like birds in warm air. But the tone. It's sharper, more precise, like a needle threading silk. Today is not for dreaming. You sit up, and a young student waits near your cushion, with a robe and slippers. He says nothing, just bows and gestures toward the inner chamber. The message is clear. It's time to begin something more serious. Inside the chamber, you find the oud doctor already seated, as always. But today he's joined by two others, an older man with a long reed flute, and a woman with a frame drum painted with faded stars. None of them look up when you enter. They're tuning, preparing. A fourth person stands near the wall, observing. Not a musician, a scribe. You sit, unsure where to place your hands, your eyes. The air feels heavier here. Even the light seems deliberate. Today, the oud doctor says without preamble, we balance what can't be seen. You nod, because that's all you ever do here. Agree to things you don't understand. He continues, according to Ibn Sina, the human body is like a city, every organ a neighborhood, every emotion a current. If one river floods, another will starve. Today, we adjust the liver. He strums a string in a low register. The reed flute joins with a hollow note that seems to come from underground. The drum beats like a slow march, measured, steady, inevitable. You lie back as instructed, eyes closed, arms relaxed. The sound surrounds you. The mahan they play is called nahawand, minor, resonant, with a hint of unease. It's said to resonate with the lower organs, the gut, the liver. the seat of anger and digestion. It's said to resonate with the lower organs, the gut, the liver, the seat of anger and digestion. It's said to resonate with the lower organs, the gut, the liver, the seat of anger and digestion. It's said to resonate with the lower organs, the gut, the liver, the seat of anger and digestion. It's said to resonate with the lower. Historians still argue whether these musical associations were metaphorical or if physicians believed in literal sonic anatomy. Either way, you feel it, deep, low, like someone humming through your bones. You're not here to enjoy it, the doctor says. You're here to release. And then the music shifts, ascending slightly, building tension. The flute weaves upward. The drum begins doubling its beat, and your breath follows, whether you want it to or not. You're not relaxing, you're processing. Images flicker in your mind, nothing mystical, just memories. That bitter conversation you buried, the job you never left, the moment you swallowed your words to keep the peace. It rises now, unbidden, like steam from a boil. You clench your jaw. Don't, the doctor says gently. Let it out. Not like a scream, like a sigh. And somehow you do. You exhale, long, trembling, like the air was hiding something on its way out. The music follows, matching your rhythm, as though it had been waiting for the cue. The woman with the drum begins a gentle roll, like distant thunder. The flute falls silent. It's just percussion now. And the ode, low, slow, patient. You hear something in your throat. Not a cry, not a sob. Just release. They don't stop, not until the breath returns to normal, not until your fists uncurl, not until your chest stops heaving like it's trying to argue. Then silence. The doctor speaks softly. That's the liver starting to forgive you. You lie there a long time before sitting up. The musicians are packing away their instruments. The scribe, who has said nothing all morning, nods once and disappears into the hall, his parchment filled with observations you'll never read. Fun tidbit. Avicenna, known in Latin as Ibn Sina, known as movement, he theorized that each internal organ could be treated through its resonance, believing the body was like an instrument constantly detuning itself with time, grief, and food that didn't agree with it. He wasn't far off. Modern sound therapy still borrows this logic, only now it's backed with brain scans and TED Talks. But back then, you didn't need EEGs. You had a gut. You had a song. You had a room full of strangers who listened more carefully than any friend you'd ever had. The oud doctor walks you back to your bench under the fig tree. He doesn't say much, just pours a cup of barley tea, hands it to you, and pats your shoulder twice. Not affection. Calibration. You sip slowly. The music has stopped, but you still hear it in your ribs. A breeze picks up, and with it, the smell of mint and charcoal. Somewhere nearby, someone is grinding herbs. Someone else is preparing a bath. Life continues quietly. Later, as the sun begins to dip, you're invited to observe a patient receiving a very different kind of musical treatment. She's older, eyes half closed, reclined beneath a hanging tapestry of vines and moon motifs. A singer sits beside her, not a performer, but a weaver of lullabies. His voice is low, steady, like a rocking chair in human form. The song he sings is simple, repetitive, ancient, no instruments, just voice. This, a nurse whispers to you, is how we soothe the dying. And suddenly the purpose of all this music becomes clear. Not to distract from death, but to escort it, to remind the body that leaving can be gentle, that silence can be earned. You leave the chamber quietly, carrying more than you brought in. Tonight, you don't need the oud to play for you. You sit alone in the courtyard, listening to the fountain. You hum. Just one note, held softly. Your body remembers what it learned. Section 6. You're walking the gardens again. At this point, you've stopped asking permission. No one seems to mind. The hospital lives in a rhythm now, one you've started syncing with unconsciously. Fountains at dawn, oud by noon, ney flutes at dusk, and the rustle of sandalwood-scented robes moving softly through torchlit halls after dark. But this morning, your path leads you somewhere new. A wide-open loggia, where 3 patients lie on cushions, each flanked by a musician and a nurse. The instruments vary: one oud, one qanun, a kind of zither, and one rebab, a bowed string that sounds like a cat learning to whisper. The nurses carry scrolls. The musicians? They're tuning like sorcerers prepping a spell. You settle on a bench, a polite distance away. No one acknowledges you, and that's somehow comforting. The session begins. But it's not a concert, it's not a performance. It's a treatment, and you quickly notice. Each patient gets a different sound. The woman with trembling hands listens to slow, watery mamams, melodies that seem to drip from one note to the next like dew. The man beside her, jittery, eyes darting, receives short, percussive bursts. And the last patient, barely moving, sunken into himself, gets an ascending scale repeated gently, again and again, like someone coaxing a bird out of a cage. You feel like you're watching music do what language can't. A nurse approaches and whispers, "This is the mood diagnosis ward." "Diagnosis?" you whisper back. She nods. Temperaments, melancholia, mania, phlegmatic dullness, sanguine fire. Each has its sound. We find the one that resonates. This, you realize, is Mood Medicine 101. Except here, it's not buried in psychology textbooks or dulled by fluorescent lighting. It's immediate. Felt. Heard. In Islamic medical theory, especially following the works of Galen and elaborated by Avicenna, every illness was tied to imbalances in temperament. Cold, hot, wet, dry. And music was used to tip the scales. You see it now, in motion. You watch the man with darting eyes slowly begin to still. His shoulders drop, his breathing synchronizes with the percussive rhythm. The qanun player changes key ever so slightly, and the patient sighs. Long and heavy, success. Historians still debate whether this was a form of proto-psychology or simply poetic intuition. But either way, the result is the same. The body responds to the note, even when the mind resists the meaning. The nurse, sensing your interest, gestures you over to a chart on the wall, hand-painted with swirls of indigo ink and gold. It's a wheel. At each quadrant, an emotional state. Joy, sorrow, fury, sloth, each linked to a musical mode. You notice a few interesting pairings: Rast for courage, Hijaz for grief, Saba for melancholy, Nahawand for introspection. And at the very center of the wheel, tiny and almost lost in the paint, a perfect circle labeled silence. Your finger hovers over it. The nurse nods, for when even melody overwhelms. She taps her temple. Sometimes, silence is the only frequency that fits. A fun tidbit: according to one 13th century treatise from Andalusia, camel herders used a rhythmic chant to calm aggressive bulls, and some Bimaristans allegedly adapted this technique into their psychiatric wards. Whether that's true or just medieval gossip is unclear, but if you'd heard some of the chanting from earlier today, you'd believe it. A gentle bell rings in the corridor, twice, then once. In the corridor, gentlemen, is a term I discovered. Twice, then once. A cue. The musicians pause. The nurses offer water, tinctures, and towels to their patients. The spell ends, for now. You walk the outer gardens to clear your head. Along the path, you find a small aviary. Not grand, not ostentatious. Just a few cages nestled in shaded alcoves. You lean in. A nightingale. Its song is otherworldly, complex, lilting, uncertain at first, and then suddenly soaring. And beside it, in a separate cage, a parrot. Bright green, enormous personality, but terrible pitch. It squawks an off-key version of the call to prayer and then mutters something in what sounds suspiciously like sarcasm. A robed caretaker appears, amused. He belonged to a judge, was gifted to us in an act of divine mercy. You both listen in silence. The nightingale helps the melancholic, he adds, but the parrot helps us, keeps us humble. You laugh. Apparently, birds were once considered essential members of certain hospitals, not just for cheer, but for therapeutic soundscapes. Each wing of the Bimaristan had its own ambient environment. The garden wards had birdsong, the water wards had fountains and harps, and some interior chambers had complete silence, because, as you now understand, too much harmony can hurt. Historians still argue whether these environmental designs were based on science or superstition, but the consistency across time and regions, from Cairo to Aleppo to Granada, suggests a shared belief in the physical power of sound. You return to your room just before sunset. On your pillow is a scroll, sealed in wax. Inside, a list of maqams, corresponding organs, and recommended listening times. The last line reads, "Your spleen prefers morning oud. Avoid afternoon nay, unless grieving." You blink. It's absurd. It's beautiful. It might even be right. You lie down, listening now with different ears. You don't just hear the music anymore. You hear what it's speaking to. And for the first time, you wonder, what melody is your mind made of? You follow the flow of movement into a larger chamber you haven't seen before. A high, vaulted ceiling filters golden light through lattice windows, casting star-shaped shadows across the floor. Wooden screens divide the space into alcoves, but today they've been pulled back. At the center of the room is a low platform, surrounded by floor cushions. Instruments, some you recognize, some that look like alien flowers, are being unpacked by a group of sun-darkened musicians speaking in a soft Andalusian dialect. You sit, heart oddly quickened. You're about to witness something special. The oud doctor appears beside you, his usual robe traded for one stitched with subtle gold threading. He leans in and says, "Today's music comes from Cordoba. Not all healing is quiet." And then the session begins. It's a full ensemble: oud, kanun, ney, riq, a type of tambourine, and an instrument that looks like a harp married to ship's rigging. Each musician plays in turn, introducing their voice like a cast of characters. The modes are unfamiliar, brighter, bolder, more theatrical. This isn't background music, it's architecture made sound. You learn that these performers came from a network of Bimaristans, stretching from Baghdad to Granada. Music therapy didn't stay static. It traveled, evolved, adapted. The rhythms of Basra were not the melodies of Fez. The scales of Cairo weren't the same as those sung on the breezy balconies of Seville. The oud doctor whispers, "We used to argue about which maqam healed better, the Nahawand of Damascus or the Bayati of Cordoba." Truth is, it depends on the patient. Historians still argue whether there was formal training for these musical physicians, or whether the tradition passed orally through generations. What's clear, though, is that each region added its flavor. In Baghdad, they paired music with poetry. In Kairouan, it was music with spice therapy. In Andalusia, where you sit now by proxy, it was music with architecture. The hospital you're in today was modeled after a famous one in Granada, where every hallway was tuned like a flute, and even the tiles were selected based on their resonance. A fun fact, in some Bimaristans, Musicians were asked to play beneath specific domes designed to echo the sound 3 times before fading. The theory? The echo soothed the nerves, reminding the listener of spaciousness, of time, of things beyond pain. As the music swells, you notice something strange. Patients begin to stand, not dance, not sway, but move. Hands lifting, shoulders rolling, a kind of subtle choreography, movements dancing together, a kind of subtle choreography, a sense of being, like a language spoken through breath. A nurse leans toward you. "This is ambulatory therapy," she whispers. "Movement guided by rhythm, very effective for apathy." And you see it. A man who hasn't moved in days slowly shifts his feet, tapping the floor in time with the beat. A woman who usually curls into herself stands a little straighter, her hands rising with the canoon's glissando. The music doctor joins the ensemble, adding a secondary melody on his oud, and suddenly the room is alive. Not loud, not rowdy, just awake. For a moment, you wonder, why did we ever stop this? Why did modern hospitals trade this for cold linoleum? Buzzing lights and the whimper of distant beeping? Historians suggest many reasons: colonial suppression of non-Western medicine, the rise of pharmaceutical authority, skepticism towards subjective healing. But none of those reasons seem to matter when you see a man who couldn't lift his arm yesterday, now clapping along on beat. Afterward, the musicians are offered warm milk and dates, a ritual of thanks. You help pass the plates. One of the players, an elderly man with silver rings and eyebrows like twin eagles, places a hand on your shoulder. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asks. You nod. Not the notes, the space between them, and then he's gone. Later that evening, you find yourself wandering again, and by instinct you follow the sound of a lone neigh. It leads you to a small garden balcony overlooking the southern wall. The oud doctor is there, watching the sky go pink. He gestures to the bench beside him. You sit. "You've heard the music of Damascus," he says. "Now, you've heard the music of Cordova." He plucks a few soft notes. "So, what is yours?" You hesitate. "I don't know." "That's fine," he says. "But eventually, you must answer. Everyone has a scale, a mode, a harmony waiting to be remembered." You sit in silence for a while. A bird calls. The wind stirs the trees. Somewhere far away, the last notes of the Andalusian ensemble dissolve into the air like perfume. You don't feel healed. You feel tuned, like a string someone finally noticed was slack and gently, without judgment, brought back to pitch. Brought back to pitch. Section 8. Night falls slowly over the Bamaristan, as if the sun itself doesn't want to leave. The fountains dim to a gentle gurgle. Lanterns are lit one by one, and the entire complex seems to exhale. You don't realize where your feet are taking you until you arrive at a small, half-lit corridor with a sign painted in faded calligraphy. You ask the nurse beside the door what it means. "The ward of the dying," she says gently. "Would you like to sit with them?" You pause, not out of fear, but respect. And then, you nod. She opens the door for you. Inside, the air is thicker, not with incense, but with something subtler: reverence. The chamber is circular, designed so that the sound flows evenly. Its walls are padded with tapestries, not for warmth, but to soften the echoes. Light spills through a small domed opening at the top, casting a moonlight glow on the floor. Everything here seems to float just above the surface of sound. There are 7 beds, arranged like spokes of a wheel. And in the center of that wheel, on a low dais, sits a musician with a daff, the frame drum that hums like a distant heart. She plays softly, no melody, just rhythm. like a lullaby for the bones. You sit near the wall, barely breathing, as if louder air might disturb what's already shifting in this room. One of the patients, a thin man wrapped in a linen shroud, smiles faintly. His eyes are half closed. His breath is slow. You get the sense he's already halfway gone. The music doesn't beg him to stay. It simply accompanies. Every note here has been chosen with care. A slow 3-beat rhythm to mimic the heart, gentle percussion to guide the breath, and a repeating melodic fragment, just 4 notes, played on a ney by a young woman in the corner. The percussion is slow. The work is very deep. The repeating voice played on the ney by a young woman in the corner. She never looks up. Her eyes stay closed as she plays the same phrase again and again, like a whispered prayer looping back on itself. This isn't grief. It's not mourning. It's acceptance, scored in wood and wind. Fun fact, in some hospitals, musicians were trained specifically to play for the dying. They were chosen not for virtuosity, but for temperament. No flamboyance, no flourishes, just consistency. There are even historical notes describing how certain maqams were forbidden in these wards because their energy was too disruptive. Imagine being told your favorite scale was too alive. Historians still argue whether this musical accompaniment had theological approval or if it walked a fine line between spiritual and secular. Some scholars in the stricter schools of jurisprudence frowned on music in sacred spaces, yet here it was, cradling the moment of passing. A nurse moves silently between beds, adjusting pillows, placing cool cloths on foreheads, whispering verses not meant for the living. You realize no one is trying to stop death here. They're just making sure it arrives gently. One man begins to breathe faster. His fingers twitch. The DALL player shifts her rhythm to match. The ney transitions into a descending motif. Subtle, downward curving, like a falling leaf that never lands. Then, stillness. No gasp, no cry, just stillness. The music does not stop. It fades, over many minutes, as if following him wherever he's gone. The nurse covers the man's face with the sheet. The other patients do not react. They've seen this before. The DALL player finally lowers her hands, and the room exhales with her. The silence is thick, but not heavy. You've never felt more grateful for quiet. You step outside with the nurse. Do they always die like that, you ask? She shrugs, not unkindly. No, but often, especially if they've had time. And music. She smiles and adds, sometimes it helps the ones left behind even more. You understand. You return to the courtyard with the fig tree. The lanterns sway in the warm breeze, casting dancing shadows. You sit beneath the tree, unsure of what to feel. Then you hear it, faint but unmistakable, a single string plucked on an oud. Just one note. You look up. The doctor is standing across the courtyard, alone, the oud on his hip like always. He doesn't speak. He just nods, and then plays a short tune. Slow, patient, with space between each note large enough to breathe through. You feel it wash over you like warm rain. Not to heal, not to fix, just to be with you. Silent. Shayu. It's a lullaby, not for sleep, but for acceptance. The kind of sound that holds space for feelings you haven't named yet. You close your eyes, not to escape, but to listen better. Section 9. The next morning begins in the hospital's kitchen, not because you're hungry, though you are, but because the music led you there. A steady tapping, like a wooden metronome, followed by a short melody on a reed flute. Then, laughter. Not quiet and respectful, but genuine, full-bodied laughter. It's strange how healing sounds different here. You follow the noise down a shaded corridor into a warm, sunlit room filled with clay pots, baskets of herbs, and a group of people clearly in the act of serious but joyous creation. There are two cooks chopping herbs in rhythm, a boy crushing garlic with a mortar in perfect time to a frame drum's beat, and one woman stirring a giant pot while humming what can only be described as a recipe in song. You blink. "Come in," says one of the cooks, grinning. "We're composing soup." He's not joking. This is the hospital's culinary apothecary, where food is not just medicine, but melody. You're told that in certain wards, patients' meals are coordinated with specific musical scales. The idea is simple and somehow profound. Healing happens in harmony. Inside and out. The woman stirring the soup gestures toward the pot. "This one's for the phlegmatic," she says. "Lentils, cumin, thyme, bay leaf, and a little vinegar. Strong, warming. Needs Bayati mode to help the body listen." And just like that, someone picks up a lute and plays the Bayati scale beside the simmering pot. You look around for hidden cameras, but no, this is real. The cook explains that each dish is designed for a temperament: hot, cold, wet, dry, just like the humors. And when served, it's accompanied by music tuned to that balance, sometimes slow and heavy for grounding, sometimes sharp and bright to wake up the system. It's all about resonance. Just like the Oud doctor said, the liver listens. Apparently, so do the intestines. Fun fact, some medieval hospital kitchens employed dedicated culinary musicians. Their job wasn't to season the food, but to season the space where it was made. The theory was that joyful sound improved digestion, and that a cook who sang into the pot stirred medicine into the broth. Historians still argue whether this was actual medical practice or just clever superstition. Either way, the food reportedly tasted better. You're offered a small bowl, warm, rich, slightly tangy. As you sip, someone plays a soft accompaniment on a tanbur, a long-necked string instrument with a sound like golden silk unraveling. You can feel the difference. The cook watches your face. Good. That means your bile is responding. You want to laugh, but you're too busy enjoying the way your stomach sighs in gratitude. Later, you're invited to observe something called the sonic diet consultation. Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. You're ushered into a modest room with walls covered in painted diagrams, organs, plants, stars, and, of course, musical scales. Seated beside a small table is a physician in green robes, flanked by a musician and a scribe. Across from them sits a young patient, nervous, wringing his hands. The doctor speaks gently. "You've been having difficulty digesting joy." The patient looks confused. "Stomach pain," the doctor clarifies. "But it's not the food, it's the sound. You're eating without melody." He turns to the musician. "Play him Hijaz Kher Kurd." The musician nods and begins. A tense, winding melody with sharp edges and sudden dips. The patient stiffens. The doctor watches him carefully. "Now Rast." A brighter, more open scale. The patient exhales. "There it is." The doctor murmurs. His gut prefers simplicity. He prescribes a diet of stewed vegetables, mint tea, and listening to specific ma'ams while eating, twice daily. You're scribbling mental notes like an intern. The doctor turns to you. "Would you like a diagnosis?" You stammer something resembling consent. He looks you over. Your shoulders are stiff. Your humor is dry. You chew too fast, probably because you eat in silence. You nod, sheepish. He prescribes warm barley soup, 1 fig before bed, and a 10-minute Oud piece in Saba mode before dinner. No talking during meals, and if possible, eat near moving water. This might be the best medical advice you've ever received. Later, wandering the herb gardens, you hear 2 apprentices arguing, playfully, over whether certain spices require matching instruments. "Coriander wants flute," one insists. "Coriander wants silence," the other says flatly. They both look to you. You raise your hands. I'm just here for the figs. They laugh. It turns out that these kinds of debates are part of daily life in the Bamaristan. Scholars, cooks, musicians, and physicians often overlap here. There's no hard line between nourishment and knowledge, between music and medicine. One of the apprentices leans in. We say the kitchen is just another ward. The patients are hungrier, but the treatment is the same. You walk back to your bench under the fig tree, a small bowl of lentil soup in your hands, a soft melody drifting after you from the kitchen's open door. As you eat, the oud doctor passes by, sees you listening, and simply nods. You're beginning to taste it, he says. Section 10. By now, you've become attuned to the layers of sound that inhabit the Bamaristan. You hear things others might miss. A shift in rhythm in the courtyard. A subtle change in the nay's vibrato. The way footsteps echo differently after rain. But today, something catches you by surprise. Birdsong. Not just the usual early morning trills, but full orchestration. A dozen voices, layered, almost choreographed. Then there's the hum. The songs that many previously layered over fall away when the rain petals drop and scatter the residue of the fog. The second song catches your eye. One person sings a single note, louder than another, a show that both breaks your heart and symbolizes hope. One person sings, and oddly, it seems deliberate. You follow the sound through the back gardens, where tall pomegranate trees cast dappled shadows on the stone path. You turn a corner and stop. An aviary, larger than you'd expect, more sanctuary than cage. Tiled and shaded, ringed by flowering vines, it hums with chirps, calls, and the occasional squawk. Some birds are free, flitting from branch to branch. Others are gently housed in spacious enclosures. Songbirds, mostly. Bulbuls, thrushes, canaries. But here and there you spot more curious residents. A hoopoe, a bright blue starling, and, in one particularly elaborate corner, an absolutely enormous parrot. He sees you, tilts his head, and says, in perfectly slurred Arabic, "Don't trust anyone with cold soup." A nurse nearby nearly drops her basket laughing. "He belonged to a physician from Basra," she explains, "retired here after scaring off 3 scholars during a debate." You nod slowly. It tracks. As she calms the bird with a slice of apple, she explains the deeper purpose of the aviary. These birds aren't pets, they're therapy. You raise an eyebrow. She continues. Each species chosen for pitch, tone, and temperament. The canaries help with sleeplessness. The nightingales, grief. The starlings are for restoring attention in melancholic patients. The parrot, she sighs with fond exasperation, is for reminding the staff that perfection is a myth. A fun and very real historical tidbit, several Islamic medical texts describe the use of bird sounds in healing environments, especially nightingales. One 11th century physician even recorded that the presence of certain birds improved recovery time for patients suffering from darkness of mood. Whether this was psychosomatic or poetic is still debated, but the practice endured across centuries. As you observe, a small group of patients is guided into the garden. Some walk slowly, others in wheeled wooden chairs. They sit beneath pergolas covered in jasmine, eyes closed, facing the bird song like sunflowers tracking light. A musician joins them, not to perform but to accompany. He plays a ney flute, soft and slow, matching the rhythms of the birds rather than leading them. It becomes impossible to tell which came first, the chirp or the note. He tells them, "You have come to the right place. We will be coaching you. We will prepare you for sunset. The first will be travel, the second, coming. Note to the birds." As you observe, a small group of patients, not to be confused with chirp or the note. You sit nearby, and within minutes, you begin to feel it too. A kind of recalibration. The internal static you didn't even realize had returned begins to fade. Sound is medicine. the nurse says quietly beside you. But nature is the physician. Historians still argue whether this blending of music and nature was symbolic or strategic. But in the Islamic Golden Age, scholars saw no distinction between the natural world and the human body. Birds, plants, stars, they were all part of the same system. A single out-of-tune note in this worldview could ripple into illness. So why wouldn't you prescribe birdsong? The nurse points toward a small side garden where two apprentices are building a wooden structure covered in reeds. A new nesting area, she explains. We're introducing a species of mountain finch said to sing just before sunrise. Good for early melancholia. You chuckle. And what happens if it doesn't sing? She shrugs. Then we listen anyway. Silence has its own harmonies. You wander deeper into the aviary and notice how carefully everything is arranged. Certain species are paired intentionally. One tree is occupied solely by turtle doves, their calls low and mournful. Another houses sunbirds, high, crystalline notes that dance through the air like falling snowflakes. But the centerpiece? A wide stone basin filled with water, where several birds bathe and drink. The sound of wings, splashes, and the occasional delighted shriek forms its own miniature symphony. You realize, with a strange pang of joy, that this garden wasn't made to entertain patients. It was made to tune them. Every chirp, every flutter, every gentle wind chime hanging from the fig tree. All part of a great auditory equation meant to restore what the city, the body, or the world had unsettled. You return to the courtyard just before dusk. The oud doctor is sitting on a low wall, tuning a small instrument with a bored look on his face. You met the parrot, didn't you? He asks without looking up. You nod. No. He says something about soup. He smiles. That bird knows more medicine than half the scholars I've met. He strums a chord. The note lingers. You see now, he says softly, that healing doesn't always arrive in a bottle or a bandage. Sometimes it sings. You sit beside him, just in time to hear a nightingale begin her evening solo. Melancholy and sharp, like a memory that refuses to fade. He listens, nods, and plays along, matching her call note for note. And for a moment, you believe they're speaking. Section 11. It's a quiet morning, unusually so. You've grown used to the hospital's symphony, the water, the strings, the birds, the soft shuffle of sandals on stone. But today, the corridors feel hushed. The melodies are gentler, the rhythms more contained, like the whole place is holding its breath. A nurse tells you, today is observation day in the women's wards. You pause. You hadn't realized there was an entire section of the hospital you hadn't seen, partitioned not by secrecy, but by design. Respectful, intentional, specific. She leads you through a discreet hallway with latticed screens. Sunlight filters through carved cedar, casting patterned light onto the tile. The air is scented with rosewater and something deeper, myrrh, or maybe clove. Calming, warm. You step into a chamber designed with completely different acoustics. The ceiling is lower, the walls more absorbent, draped in woven fabric with patterns of vines and spirals. It feels closer, cocooned. A group of women sit in a semicircle on cushions, attended by nurses and two female musicians, one playing a santure, kind of dulcimer played with small wooden mallets, the other with a camanche, a bowed string instrument held upright like a chalice. The santure chimes gently, shimmering like light bouncing off glass. The camanche's tone is soft but haunting. Together, they don't fill the room, they settle into it. You're invited to sit behind a screen so as not to intrude, and you do, grateful for the anonymity. Here, in this softer soundscape, the music moves differently, slower, fewer key changes, longer pauses. You begin to understand, In the women's wards, music wasn't just healing, it was modulated healing. It was celebrated healing. But the women would not permit this so long. The men were singing in their sleep. It was not listening to a monitor, it was listening to a mother. He begins to understand, in the women's wards, music wasn't just healing, it was modulated healing. Filtered through culture, expectation, protection, but not in a way that diminished it, only reshaped it. Fun fact: some medieval physicians believed women's illnesses stemmed from interior movement of the humors caused by emotional restraint. And so certain instruments, particularly plucked or bowed ones, were used to coax forth what was held in. The Santer's vibrations, specifically, were believed to help restore rhythm to disrupted cycles, though modern scholars take that with a spoonful of salt and historical context. One of the patients begins to cry, not out of pain, but release. Her shoulders drop, her hands stop fidgeting. The music doesn't pause or respond dramatically. It continues, like a current, carrying her through. The attending nurse speaks softly to her, not to hush her, but to ground her. The others give her space, and the musicians don't look away. You realize this isn't therapy, it's communion. Historians still argue whether music in women's wards was considered equal in importance or merely a soothing afterthought. But here, behind the screen, you sense no condescension, only calibration. The same principles gently adapted. You're told that certain instruments were considered more appropriate in these wards. The oud was rarely used, too bold, too masculine in tone. Instead, they favored flutes, harps, and the santur, what one scribe once called instruments that respect the breath. In some cases, voice alone was used, especially among women who had experienced trauma. There are ancient records describing circle songs, a form of melodic chanting where each patient adds a verse or tone, creating a communal song that changes and evolves as it's sung. Today, they do something similar. The musicians pause, and one patient, eyes closed, voice barely a thread, begins to hum a single note. Another joins, then another. No words, just harmony. Each woman's note hovers gently, not trying to outshine the others. No one leads, no one follows. It's a sonic quilt stitched from breath. And for a brief, impossible moment, it's beautiful beyond belief. You sit behind the screen, eyes misted, pulse softened. There's something in this simplicity, this layered sound of pain turned to prayer, that touches a nerve modern medicine often forgets exists. Later, in the garden, a nurse explains how music is sometimes used to help women prepare for childbirth. Specifically, long, low-toned melodies to regulate breathing and reduce fear. One makam in particular, Husseini, is often prescribed in the final days before labor. It's said to invite courage with modesty. And yes, someone did once play it during a delivery. It worked, probably. A fun but strange anecdote. One hospital record includes a note about a female patient who insisted her contractions didn't start until the second verse of the lullaby. The attending physician wrote, somewhat bitterly, "May God reward patience, for melody governs more than pulse. As the sun sets, you return through the shaded corridor, past the screens, back to the main courtyard. It feels louder now, not jarring, but expansive, like you've stepped out of a library into an amphitheater. You think about the separation. Was it necessary? Was it limiting? Was it wise?" The doctor sees you return. He raises an eyebrow. "Well," he asks, "what did you hear?" You think for a moment. Silence that didn't feel empty. He smiles. Then they did their job. And for the rest of the evening, no one plays music for you. You sit in your usual spot beneath the fig tree, letting the quiet echo with the memory of unseen women who sang, hummed, and healed together. Section 12. You wake to rain. Not the angry kind. Not the kind that makes the sky grumble like an old man getting out of bed. No, this is a light, steady patter, barely there, like the sky decided to whisper rather than speak. The air smells different, earthier. The tiles slick with moisture. For once, the courtyard fountain is no longer the loudest water in the room. Today, they move the musical sessions indoors. You are escorted to a domed hall you haven't seen before. It's octagonal, its high ceiling ribbed with cedar beams, with a single hanging lamp swaying gently above the center. Every surface here feels intentional. Wool carpets, silk drapes, low stone benches covered in fabric thick enough to muffle your footsteps. This isn't just a room. It's an instrument. Acoustic design, says the young architect apprentice standing beside you, clearly proud. Avicenna said, where the body weakens, sound must be strong, but not loud. He gestures to the curved walls. Each chamber in this hospital was built with a sonic personality. This one, built for resonance and return. He claps softly. The sound bounces once, tip, and then melts away like butter on warm bread. Soft reverb, good for calming the anxious. You smile. Of course this hospital would think of reverb as a prescription. Now, might I presume you learn that every space in the Bimaristan has its own auditory signature. Some are designed to dampen sound, others to amplify it, depending on the intended treatment. The sleeping chambers are quiet cocoons. The prayer halls echo with long decay, and the diagnostic rooms, tuned to hear the tiniest whisper of voice, breath, or music. Fun fact, early Islamic architects often consulted not only physicians but musicians when designing medical facilities. In fact, Western culture often consulted physicians when designing medical facilities. The goal wasn't just beauty, but balance. A place where the body and the environment coexisted in sympathetic vibration. Some blueprints even featured annotations like preferred pitch resonance here, or avoid flat surfaces too sharp. You sit as the musicians arrive, two with ouds, one with a kanun, and another with a riku tambourine the size of a dinner plate. They take their positions in the center, surrounded by a dozen patients lying or reclining around the perimeter of the room, each in their own sonic bubble. When they begin, you understand why this room was chosen. The sound doesn't attack you. It arrives, gently, as though it had been sleeping in the walls, waiting for a reason to stretch its limbs. The kanun's notes ripple outward, like raindrops in a still pond. The tambourine taps a rhythm just beneath your heartbeat. The ouds, the ouds, speak to each other like siblings who've forgiven each other long ago. One of the musicians adjusts his tempo ever so slightly, and the air shifts with it. It's not performance. It's orchestration of space. You notice how the room listens back. A patient sighs. The kanun player softens. Another shifts on his cushion. The tambourine matches. Every note responds. It's music made by the room, not just in it. The architect apprentice leans toward you again. The carpets are different thicknesses. That corner over there, he points, meant for grief. Heavier rug, softer return. You blink. You can assign sorrow a corner? He smiles. No, but you can welcome it one. Historians still debate how intentional these acoustic designs really were. Some suggest it was all just happy accidents of Islamic geometry and good taste. But the repetition across centuries and regions, courtyards, domes, water features, fabric-covered walls, suggests a shared understanding of sound as a therapeutic tool. Even the dome served a purpose. Certain musical phrases, when played upward into a dome, would swirl and return, softened, as though the sky itself were humming back. You sit in one such corner now, wrapped in a melody you didn't expect to love, and realize that the architecture itself is playing you like a string. The session ends with silence. Not abrupt, just stopped. and the quiet that follows isn't empty. It's earned, like a breath you didn't know you'd been holding all your life. As the musicians pack up, you take a slow walk through the rest of the ward, noting now what you hadn't before. The way doorways narrow to frame sound, how ceilings arch to collect it, how even the placement of water basins creates a kind of percussive punctuation. In one quiet hallway, you pass a small side room filled with pillows and thick rugs. Inside, a woman lies curled beneath a heavy blanket while a single reed flute plays from a hidden corner. You don't see the musician. You don't need to. This room was designed to contain sadness, not erase it, not cheer it up. Just let it exist, safely. A nurse catches your eye. "That's our retreat chamber," she whispers, "for when the world is too loud. No talking aloud, no music, unless requested. Just presence." You nod. It might be your favorite room so far. That evening, back in the courtyard, the rain has stopped, and the tiles glisten like polished marble. The fountain sings louder now, proud of its solo. You sit beneath the fig tree again, this time seeing the space not just as a garden, but as a perfectly tuned amphitheater of calm. The oud doctor appears, carrying no instrument, just a small jar of saffron milk. He hands it to you. "You've spent days listening to music," he says. "Now, listen to quiet." He walks away. You sit there long after the stars come out, and in the stillness, you hear the room listening back. Section 13. It's mid-morning, and the hospital is unusually lively. Not chaotic, nothing here is ever truly chaotic, but pulsing with a different kind of energy. You hear footsteps moving faster, voices raised in spirited debate, the clatter of wooden tablets against polished desks. You ask a nurse what's going on. She grins. "Today's a teaching day." You follow her through a shaded walkway that opens into what looks suspiciously like a small amphitheater. There are 3 students in long robes sit on low stools, scrolls rolled open on their laps, and at the center stands a physician with ink-stained fingers and an expression that says, "I have explained this 37 times and will do it 38. The topic today? Anatomy. Specifically, the spleen. Again, the instructor says, "What does the spleen do?" A student raises his hand. It hums. The room laughs. The teacher does not. "You're not wrong," he says, "but you're not right either." And then, without warning, he picks up a lute and strums a single note, a low one, resonant, almost dissonant. "This," he says, "is the sound of stagnation. What happens when the spleen refuses to circulate the black bile? Now, who remembers the cleansing scale? From the second tier of the amphitheater, someone begins playing the right mode. Light, upward moving, cheerful." The teacher nods. "Better. Always prescribe hope in the key of Hijaz-Kar." You're speechless, because this is a medical lecture, and the students are learning through jam sessions? It turns out that in some teaching hospitals, particularly in Damascus and Baghdad, music was not just therapy, it was pedagogy. Students memorized the 4 humors through verses set to familiar tunes. Anatomy diagrams came with rhymed mnemonics. And in one particular madrasa in Cairo, it said that a song about the digestive tract became so catchy it had to be banned after it was caught being sung in bathhouses. Yes, really. Historians still argue whether this musical education was effective or simply a product of oral culture, but the consistent presence of musical reference in medical texts from this period suggests more than novelty. It was necessity. When knowledge was scarce and paper was gold, melody made memory. Today's lesson continues with demonstrations. A drumbeat for heartbeat variations, a plucked pattern to mimic muscle tension, and even a reed flute solo meant to describe the swelling and shrinking of the liver. It sounds ridiculous until you feel it in your own ribs. The instructor sees you watching and waves you over. "We need a volunteer," he says, "for the next song." You hesitate. He smiles. It's just breath work. You nod, stand in the center, and he motions for you to breathe deeply. The students listen. The musicians play a soft accompaniment to match the rhythm of your inhale and exhale. The instructor claps out a pulse. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Your breath follows, and the melody shifts to guide you into slower, steadier cycles. Good, he says. See how music reveals the truth before the patient speaks? You return to your seat as the next student volunteers. This one's breath is shallow, anxious. The musicians change again. The flute mimics the tension. The drum adds hesitancy. The room watches, learning. A fun fact: there's record of a 12th century Persian medical school where exams included musical performance, not for art's sake, but to demonstrate diagnostic mastery. If a student couldn't play the liver's maqam, they weren't allowed to treat digestive issues. One student in your session begins humming along with the drum and is immediately told to stop. This is not the place for improvisation, the teacher says sharply. First, you learn the music of the body. Only then do you compose. That afternoon, you sit in the garden with a few of the apprentices. They're scribbling verses in their notebooks, not poetry, but medical protocols in rhyme. One sings softly, "If phlegm is thick and blood is thin, begin with bayati and cleanse from within." You chuckle. You're all going to grow up to be very strange doctors. One apprentice grins. Better strange and effective than boring and forgettable. And maybe that's the secret of this place. Not just the music, or the architecture, or the bird song, but the joy. The gentle absurdity that wraps itself around serious things to make them bearable, to make them stick. Later that evening, back in the courtyard, you hear someone softly whistling the spleen song again. You turn. It's the oud doctor. He shrugs. Old habits. You ask him if he ever studied medicine formally. He shakes his head. No, I studied people. The melodies came later. You sit beneath the fig tree, and he strums a few lazy chords. Everyone thinks medicine is about fixing, he says. No, it's about fixing, he said. But sometimes it's just about remembering how it felt to be whole. You listen, watching the lantern light flicker on the fountain's surface. And for once, you don't want to learn anything. You just want to hum along. Section 14. You wake the next morning to a strange sound. It's music, but not like what you've heard in the courtyards or domes. This is rawer, earthier. A solo voice, slightly off-key, vibrating with something between sorrow and endurance, rising and falling in long, aching tones. You follow it, drawn through a side garden you haven't explored. The sun is barely up. The hospital hasn't fully stirred yet, but the song keeps pulling. At the far end of the garden, tucked behind a tall wall covered in climbing jasmine, you find it, a small courtyard, overgrown, quiet. And there, seated on a stone bench, with an ancient-looking lyre in her lap, is a woman. Her hair is silver, her back is straight, her eyes are closed. She sings again, slow, steady, haunting. You don't understand the words, but you feel them. A nurse notices you standing in the archway and approaches. She's one of the singers, the nurse says quietly. Musician? No, she smiles. A ghulam. Or once was. You blink. A ghulam. One of the often forgotten figures of medieval Islamic society. Enslaved servants, sometimes trained in war, other times in art and occasionally in music. She used to perform for the caliph's court, the nurse explains. When her voice faded, they sent her here. She now sings for the dying. You sit down slowly, watching her fingers pluck the lyre's strings with muscle memory honed over decades. She must have seen everything, you whisper. The nurse nods, and lost more than she tells. You learn that the Bimaristan doesn't just treat patients. It employs people the world forgets. Musicians born into servitude, Children trained from youth to master rhythms and modes, only to be discarded when their fingers stiffen. Here, they find purpose again. Not fame, not redemption, but belonging. Fun fact: many hospitals and palaces during the Islamic Golden Age employed enslaved or indentured musicians, not just for entertainment, but for ceremonial duties, religious functions, and yes, therapeutic work. Their names were rarely recorded, their compositions even less so. But without them, much of the musical healing tradition wouldn't exist. Historians still argue how voluntary this labor was. Some claim these musicians were revered artisans. Others describe exploitative systems cloaked in prestige. The truth, as usual, likely lives somewhere between those scales. The singer finishes her verse. She opens her eyes and sees you. "You're new," she says. Her voice is softer when she speaks, rough but kind. You nod. She smiles. "They sent me here after I lost my hearing in one ear, said I was no longer useful to the palace. But they didn't realize. Music isn't only what you hear." She taps her chest gently. "It's what you remember." You sit with her for a while as the light climbs higher over the courtyard wall. She offers you a date from a small clay bowl and begins singing another tune. This one brighter, almost playful, a lullaby, you realize. "To comfort the living," she says, as if reading your thoughts. "Because not everyone here is dying." You learn there are others like her, men and women, old and young, trained not by conservatories but by circumstances. Most were never free. But now, they heal the free. You ask if she composed the melodies herself. "Some," she says. "Others were passed down. No written notes. Just repetition. If it was good enough to be remembered, it was good enough to survive." That sticks with you. Later, the oud doctor finds you beneath the fig tree. He sits beside you without greeting, just hands you a scroll. Inside, a list of names. You read them slowly. They're not patients. They're not doctors. They're musicians. Most of these were never recorded in official history, he says. But every melody you've heard came from hands like theirs. He gestures to the scroll. She, he taps a name, taught the makam of grief. He invented the rhythm we use in recovery rooms. That one tuned every out in this hospital for 20 years. You hold the list carefully. They weren't nobles, weren't free, but their music outlived their masters. There's a silence between you that isn't awkward. It's reverent. And then the doctor adds, almost offhandedly, there's a saying here, we heal in borrowed songs. You think about that for a long time. That evening, during the sunset session in the main courtyard, the singer returns. She doesn't join the ensemble, she just listens, hands folded in her lap, head tilted slightly, and when one of the musicians falters, she hums the right note from across the garden. They hear her, they adjust, and you wonder if, perhaps, she was always the conductor, just in disguise. Section 15. You've started noticing the silences. Not just the spaces between music, but the places where music used to be. A corridor where an oud once echoed, but now lies quiet. A courtyard where birdsong has stopped, though the birds still perch on branches. The hush isn't accidental. It's curated. One morning, a nurse greets you with a warm towel and a quiet request. Today, you're to be in the no-sound ward. Your brow rises. No music? She nods. Exactly. You follow her through quieter hallways than usual. The lamps are dimmed. The floors more thickly carpeted. Even your own footsteps feel like they've agreed to tiptoe. The door to the ward opens on what looks like a regular room. Stone walls, soft cushions, a small fountain at the center. But the moment you step inside, you feel it. Stillness. Not forced, not heavy, just full. There's a man lying on a low bed near the window. His eyes are closed. No instruments play nearby. No musician waits in the corner, only the faint sound of wind stirring the trees outside. You sit on a cushion, instinctively quiet. The nurse smiles. He was overstimulated. Too many melodies, too many well-meaning songs. Sometimes silence is the prescription. She leaves, and you stay, unsure whether to speak, move, or even breathe too loudly. It turns out this isn't rare. The Bimaristan maintains entire wards where sound is restricted. Not forbidden, just thoughtfully absent. Not everyone heals through harmony. Some need stillness to restore their rhythm. The physicians call it tonal fasting. Fun fact, Avicenna himself wrote about this phenomenon, describing certain delicate natures who could be unbalanced by excessive auditory input. He recommended silence as a remedy, but not cold, empty silence. Rather, a silence with shape. That is, a curated absence of noise, just as carefully designed as music itself. Historians still argue whether these quiet prescriptions were standard medical practice or merely theoretical advice. But Bimaristan records confirm that no sound chambers were part of architectural plans in several major hospitals, especially for treating sensory overload, anxiety, and spiritual fatigue. You sit there absorbing the softness of the room. Even the fountain is different, engineered to trickle in muted spirals, barely registering above a whisper. The walls are draped in heavy fabric, absorbing echoes before they can bounce. The lanterns emit a glow rather than flicker, and you begin to notice things. The sound of your own breath, the faint pop of joints in your neck, the blood humming in your ears. In the absence of external melody, your body becomes the instrument. The patient near the window stirs. A nurse enters silently, touches his wrist, checks his pulse, then exits. Still no words, no notes, just presence. You wonder what this patient heard before this silence. Did the oud fail him? Did a ney flute stir something too deep? Was he surrounded by music so long he forgot how to hear himself? The nurse returns and offers you tea. No clink of porcelain, no spoon. Just warm barley infusion, poured directly into a cup made of carved wood. It has weight, but no noise. You drink it slowly. It tastes more vivid in the quiet. The day passes that way. No melodies, no singing, just stillness thick enough to feel with your hands. You begin to understand that this, too, is a form of healing. That music, however beautiful, is only one end of a spectrum. On the other end, the pause, the reset, the space. You leave the no-sound ward in the early evening, blinking into the soft buzz of birds and fountains. It feels almost loud after so much stillness. The first flute you hear makes you jump a little. The oud doctor finds you by the fig tree. He raises an eyebrow. Silence day? You nod. It was strange. Like sleeping in a different bed, he says. It's not worse, it's just unfamiliar. He hands you a folded piece of paper. Inside is a diagram, a circle split in two halves. One labeled sound, the other silence. In the center, an arrow pointing both ways. He taps it. We don't heal in one direction, we sway. You sit together a long time, not speaking. Eventually he breaks the silence, not with words, but with a single pluck of his oud. Just one note. Low, soft, final. That, he says, is enough for today. He leaves. You remain under the fig tree, listening not for music, but for absence. And it is kind. Section 16. You wake on your final day in the Bimaristan to a familiar sound. Not the oud, not the ney, not even birdsong. It's footsteps, your own, echoing softly down a tiled corridor. Today, the walls feel more porous, like the building is preparing to let you go. The nurses nod as you pass, the apprentices wave, the cooks sing lullabies to herbs that don't need them but thrive anyway. You don't need guidance this time. Your feet take you where they want. Back to the courtyard. The fig tree is blooming again. just barely, its leaves shimmering in the breeze. The fountain trickles, steady as always. The bench welcomes your weight like it's been waiting for you all along. You close your eyes. The music, when it comes, is faint at first. An oud, somewhere in the north wing, warming up. A flute, tentative, testing a scale. A drum beat, distant, like someone tapping on the edge of sleep. They don't come to you all at once. They gather. One by one, the musicians arrive, not in a procession, but as if summoned by memory. Each takes a seat around the courtyard in no particular formation. The oud doctor gives you a nod but says nothing. He tunes his strings slowly, deliberately. And then they begin. No instructions, no speech, just music. Not loud, not showy, not tailored to any organ or ailment. Just a gentle, collaborative offering. A closing note, a musical exhale. They're not playing for you anymore. They're playing with you, because now you know your scale, your maqam, your breath, your rhythm, your sound. You sit, spine long, eyes soft, ears open. The air is thick with harmony, not just between instruments, but between people. You recognize the rhythms of recovery, the slow healing of sorrow, the bright flashes of laughter woven between notes. The parrot squawks once from a nearby fig branch, "Don't forget your soup." You smile. The oud doctor plays a descending scale, and everyone else follows. The music begins to wind down, like a boat coming to shore, like birds returning to nests, like thoughts preparing to sleep. You inhale deeply. It smells of rosewater, wood smoke, thyme. You exhale and feel yourself returned. The final note lingers just long enough to remind you it happened, and then, like everything else in this place, it lets go. The musicians rise slowly and drift away, one by one. Only the oud doctor remains. He sits beside you on the bench, the oud now resting quietly across his lap. "You're tuned," he says. "Now, stay tuned. Remember." Now it's rising softly across his lap. "You're tuned," he says. Now it's rising softly across his lap. "You're tuned," he says. Now. You nod. He offers his hand, not for a shake, but a soft squeeze, like pressing a chord. Then he stands and walks away, oud slung over his shoulder, vanishing behind a lattice of sun and shade. You rise too. The Bimara stand doesn't feel like a building anymore. It feels like a song, one that will keep playing without you, but will always echo inside. You walk toward the exit, and as you do, the silence returns. Not empty, not sad, just whole. Now, as the doors of the Bimara stand close gently behind you, let's slow down. Your feet step lightly along the stone path that leads back into the world, but you feel changed. Not in the dramatic sense, not in the way stories often demand, but in the quiet ways that matter more. You carry no prescriptions in hand, just a rhythm in your breath, a softness in your chest, a stillness beneath your thoughts. The air around you is cooling, and the last traces of oud and rosewater fade with the breeze. The sun has dipped behind the minaret, casting long shadows that stretch like yawns across the garden wall. You feel your pulse, not racing, not dragging, just steady. This is what healing can look like, not fixing, not erasing, but remembering your own music after forgetting it for so long. So, let yourself stay in that place a little longer. Let the melody linger in your bones. Let silence speak to you like a friend who never asks for anything in return. You can hum if you want. Just one note. You already know it. Then, when you're ready, no rush, open your eyes and let the rhythm of your day begin again. Relax with new stories every 1-2 days. Subscribe for more. Edible history, sweet dreams.